Chapter 3. One Bot Army. "Damn, that's a lot of people." Jax leaned back after looking around the corner of the building they were hiding next to. The governmental palace was across an open park from them. Several armed hovercraft were parked in front, with several dozen rebels in their olive-drab get-ups, loitering around. All were armed. The park was littered with the burnt husks of hovercrafts and ground cars. Naomi leaned out to look. She made a clicking sound in her throat. "Maybe they're already dead?" "Aren't you cheery?" Jack said, then tapped his earpiece. "Rudy, you copy?" "I'm here. How are things going?" "We've had a few visitors, but so far nothing Skip couldn't take care of." "Well, there are a lot of bad guys between us and the front door. You able to get a hold of our target?" "Yeah." "He and the other two are hiding in a broom closet on the main administrative level," the droid replied. "We're pushing the power levels on the comm gear. There's a non-zero chance it'll burn out." Jax looked at Naomi. "No such luck. Administrative floor, know it?" She tapped her chin a few times, then said, "Yeah, I think I know a way in." She ducked back the way they'd just come, turning down an alleyway. She looked back. "Coming?" Baxter looked down at Jax, then followed. The alley emptied out closer to the palace by a little. Across the street was some type of shopping center, most of its windows smashed out. Smoke drifted lazily from many of them. Naomi pointed at the building. "If we go through the shopping center, we can come out near the back of the palace. There are a few service stores. I think we can jimmy one." "You think?" Jack said, leaning out to look down the street toward the palace and the dozens of armed rebels. None seemed to be paying any special attention to the shopping center. An explosion on the far side of the city from them drew the rebels' attention. Several jogged off toward the explosion. He shrugged and bolted across the street. He heard Naomi's hissed expletive as he left her and Baxter in the alley. When they joined him, he tapped Baxter on the chest. "Wait here, and cause a ruckus when I give you the signal." The droid nodded and took up a position just inside the building, his forearm blasters engaging along with the two shoulder-mounted railguns. Jax nodded to Naomi. "Lead the way." Baxter turned and scanned the area. He crept back towards the far side of the park opposite the governor's palace. He took position behind an overturned refreshment stall. While he waited, he calculated the shots he'd take and in what order. Baxter was an older model combat droid. His model had seen extensive use during the Unification War to offset the Independent's low number of fighters. Some said the Emperor's hatred of artificial intelligence came from the losses his forces suffered at the hands of combat droids like Baxter. Baxter knew better. The man who had become the Emperor was a religious zealot who had hated and lobbied against non-human intelligence for most of his career. "Bax, ready when you are," Jack said over their short-range comms. Baxter didn't acknowledge verbally. His shoulder-mounted railguns opened fire with their telltale zip-crack sound. The hovercraft to the right of the door to the palace slid backwards from the impacts before it exploded. While those first two rounds were moving at supersonic speed, Baxter turned and loosed two more. Armored rebels vanished in red mist as hovercraft and barricades exploded. Baxter stepped to his right as several dozen rebels took aim and opened fire on his position. Energy bolts struck him until he moved behind a statue of a man on a horse, a plasma rifle in his raised hand. His onboard diagnostics told him the damage was minimal. His armor had done its job. As Baxter moved behind the statue, his shoulder-mounted railguns let rip a dozen shots, the most he could fire in short succession before his power core needed to recharge the electromagnets in the launchers. He leaned out and raised his right arm, firing energy blasts at the encroaching rebels. He crouched and leapt into the air, away from the crumbling statue, to land behind a burnt-out bus. As he sailed through the air, he fired both arm cannons. He consulted his railgun ammo counter. "If you could hurry up, that'd be excellent. I'm running low on slugs," he sent over the comms. He spun out and away from the bus, his railguns barking their zip-crack staccato as supersonic rounds chewed through men, women, equipment, and the front of the palace. "Fall back, Bax. We'll make our way to the hovercraft," Jax answered. Baxter fired his remaining railgun rounds, then sprinted down a street in the opposite direction of the mechanic's garage. His sensors confirmed that the few remaining were following him. Let's go to the mall. While Baxter was taking up position behind the refreshment stall, Naomi and Jax were exiting the shopping center. The exit that Naomi had picked was across a narrow service road from the palace. A burnt-out delivery truck sat a few meters away. Right where she had said it would be was a service door. She turned to Jax. "I'll go first. See if it's locked." Before he could ask her why it wouldn't be locked, she bolted, covering the distance in no time. He watched her fidget with something for a few seconds, until she straightened and turned to wave him over. When he arrived, she said, "Not very good locks." He looked down at the control panel that looked pretty robust to him. She opened the door and he went in first. He tapped his earpiece. "Rudy, tell our friends we'll be there soon. They need to be ready to move." "Copy," the droid replied, then added, "We lifted off and are hovering near the camp. It was getting a little crowded at the LZ. "Rebels?" Jax asked. "Them, then the militia, looking for something to tip the scales in their favor. The upside is there was a lot of shooting, and there are fewer of both sides now." Jax nodded. "Okay, stay sharp." He looked at Naomi, who nodded. "Bax, ready when you are." The only reply was the zip-crack sound of railguns firing. He turned to Naomi. "You know your way around this place?" She wiggled a hand. "I've only been once, but I have a good memory." She pointed ahead. "I think this should end in the main reception hall. From there, we can get to the stairs. The administrative level is 2 or 3 up." The main reception foyer was littered with bodies, rebel and militia. The signs of a running firefight were everywhere. Chipped marble, burned wooden furniture, and more. While it had been relatively quiet on the first level, the sound of gunfire echoed into the stairwell by the time they reached the second floor. They skipped the second floor, exiting the stairwell on the third. More signs of firefights greeted them. They saw no sign of anyone alive. The smoke still wafting from scorch marks told them the fighting had been there semi-recently. "If you could hurry up, that'd be excellent. I'm running low on slugs," Baxter said in Jax's ear. Jax ran a hand through his hair. "We gotta go." He turned for the stairwell. More gunfire sounded from somewhere above. "Fall back, Bax. We'll make our way to the hovercraft." "Copy." Jax turned to Naomi. "We gotta speed this up." He pushed open the door and looked over his shoulder. "Clear." They both left the stairwell. "Okay, where to?" Naomi shrugged. "How would I know? The one time I was here, the tour didn't include the broom closets." Jax spun in a slow circle, then stopped. "Thomas Chen!" he shouted at the top of his lungs. "Are you crazy?" Naomi hissed. "Thomas Chen! Get your ass out here now or we'll leave you!" Jax shouted again. He turned to Naomi. "We're in a hurry." 2 men in deep maroon uniforms rounded a corner. "Hey!" One of them, the taller one, shouted. The shorter militiaman added, "What are you doing here? Who are you?" From behind the 2 militia, a heavy-set man of possibly Chinese descent leaned out around a large display case of medals and trophies. Excuse me, I'm Thomas Chen." The 2 militia spun. Jax raised his pistol and shot both of them in the back. "Jesus Christ!" Naomi hissed. Thomas Chen ducked back behind the display case as the 2 men hit the ground. Jax turned to her. "Relax." He held his pistol up, showing the slider set in the grip. "Stun." He turned toward the display case. "Hey, Tommy, come on." The man leaned back out. "Naomi?" She waved. "Hi, Tom. Are the others with you?" Laura and Joel came out from behind the display case. "Please help us. They've been fighting on each floor." Jax waved them over. "Well, come on. We gotta go." An explosion rocked the building, forcing the group to stop short of the stairwell Jax and Naomi had used. Jax turned away from the door, smoke wafting up through the seam between the door and the frame. Yeah, that way is probably not viable. Up, Naomi said. She pushed past Jax to the door and pushed it up. Smoke billowed out. She looked over her shoulder. The roof has to have a landing pad of some sort. And? You said it was too dangerous to fly in, Jax protested. That was then. There's another stairwell, the man Joel said. When we were meeting with the governor, I saw him use it. He pointed down the wing the two militiamen had come. That way. Exfil. Jax looked at the three terrified faces and the one stoic one. My friend has been distracting the folks outside. When I open this door, run around the building and across to the shopping center. Don't look around. Head down, run fast. He looked around and made eye contact. Got it? Naomi was trying to calm the other three. She nodded. I'll go first. Follow me. She pushed past Jax and opened the door. She didn't stop to look back or anywhere else for that matter. She bolted. Jax looked at the group. Well, go! He pushed the other woman out the door, then the heavyset guy, followed by the other one, Joel, maybe? The three aid workers scrambled out the door and out of the building. They hugged the building, then darted across the narrow service road, toward the waiting Naomi. Jax looked up and down the narrow road, then dashed across. When he arrived, he said, We go through the shopping center, then out to our transport. For the first time since they left the broom closet, Thomas Chen spoke up. I don't understand. You said you're here to rescue us? He turned to Naomi. What's happened at the camp? Who is this man? The probably not an aid worker looked at the man who was in theory her boss. Thomas, she turned to the other two. Laura, Joel, he's our only hope at not being imprisoned at best, executed at worst. The militia and the governor are no longer in power, and I suspect anyone that was here under an Imperial invite is no longer welcome. Jax nodded. We've already tangled with folks from both sides who seemed hell-bent on ransacking your camp and taking anyone they found into custody. Snapping his fingers. And they tried to steal my ship. He pointed to the section of the shopping center where he and Naomi had entered. This way. He headed off. Thomas leaned down to Naomi. This went to shit fast, she chuckled and nodded. Outside the shopping center, the results of Baxter's distraction were everywhere. Most of the armed vehicles that had been parked in front of the palace were smoking wrecks. There were a few bodies on the ground. Far more parts of bodies were in evidence. I'm going to puke, Laura croaked as she stepped out of the shopping center. Point it that way, Jax said, pointing away from the group. He looked around. Looks clear. Come on. The hovercraft was right where Jax and Naomi had left it. When they entered the mechanical bay, Baxter stepped out of the shadows. Holy hell! Thomas Chen shouted, then clamped a hand over his mouth, looking around to see if he'd given them away. Baxter was damaged. He had several scorch marks on his torso, and one of his forearm blasters had been hit. It no longer retracted completely and was spitting sparks. His scatter light optical sensor seemed to be stuttering. The droid climbed aboard the hovercraft. Sorry to startle you. He turned and stooped to offer his undamaged hand to the three new arrivals. Is this thing safe? Joel asked as he climbed into the cargo bay. Until they start shooting at us, the droid replied. Just get in. Jax helped Laura up into the cargo bed. He turned to Thomas. Up you go. He turned to Naomi. Get it started. She nodded and climbed into the small cab. As he climbed into the cab next to Naomi, he tapped his earpiece. Rudy, Skip, we're probably coming in hot. Find me an exfil location, please. Copy that, the Osprey's SI replied. The hovercraft's motor engaged, whining as the craft lifted off the ground. Hang on tight, Naomi said, pushing the throttle forward as the small vehicle eased out of the garage. Need me to drive? Jax offered. The black-haired woman next to him smirked. I'm good. We've got company, Baxter said over the whine of the motor. Jax looked over his shoulder. 2 military hovercraft were racing behind them. As he was watching, The familiar energy bolts of Baxter's forearm blaster lanced out, striking the lead hovercraft, leaving scorch marks. "My auxiliary power cells are a bit depleted." "They're getting closer," Laura shrieked. "What do we do?" Joel shouted. "Who are they, militia?" Thomas Chen shouted. "Doesn't matter," Jax asked, as weapons fire raked the back of their vehicle, chewing up the metal tailgate. He turned to Naomi. "Maybe try to avoid their fire?" "This isn't a fighter," the woman growled. She yanked hard on the controls, forcing the hovercraft to take a turn far too tight. They slammed into the corner of a building, losing speed. "Okay, give me the wheel," Jax ordered, but was met with a hand shoving him away. "I got this," Naomi hissed, as their vehicle picked up speed. The two chasing hovercraft took the corner slower, but were already gaining again. The edge of town was 3 or 4 more blocks to the side of their current course, though the buildings were all single-story already. Before Jax could reply, a beam of deep purple light lanced down from the sky to spear the lead hovercraft. In the span between 2 seconds, the hovercraft and its occupants ceased to exist. The Osprey roared overhead, sending dust in every direction. Meet your hospitality staff. When they arrived at coordinates Rudy provided, they ditched the smoking hovercraft and walked towards a clearing as the Osprey roared in overhead. She circled as her landing gear unfolded, then lowered to the ground. "Bax, get our last guests aboard," Jax shouted, as the Osprey's landing gear sunk into the dirt, her lift engines whining. The boarding ramp dropped and unfolded. Jax didn't wait for Naomi or the other aid workers. He ran up the ramp and took the stairs 2 at a time to get to the flight deck and get the Osprey ready to depart. As the last of the aid workers moved up the ramp, Baxter turned his head. "Technicals incoming," he beamed to Skip. "Captain, we have incoming hostiles. 3 hovercraft that look like they are equipped with anti-aircraft weaponry," Skip announced. Jax was working the controls and glanced at one of the overhead monitors. He slapped the intercom button. "Hold on, this is going to get bumpy." From 2 decks below, he heard the whine of the boarding ramp retracting. He powered up the lift thrusters and urged the ship into the sky, just high enough that the belly-mounted particle beam could be brought to bear. The ship rocked as anti-aircraft rounds slammed into the hull. We're not invincible. Those rounds are meant for aircraft, but a hit in the same place will puncture the hull," Skip warned. "Then return fire," Jack said, as he began to power up the main engines, pushing the Osprey towards the oncoming hovercraft, fast. From somewhere deep inside the ship, a powerful whine rose, then faded. A deep purple beam of light lanced out from under the ship and carved a jagged line through the hard-packed dirt, and all 3 hovercraft. There was barely enough of the vehicles left to explode or catch fire. Jax grinned, pushing the throttle control forward as he pulled the flight stick back towards his chair. The Osprey roared as she climbed higher and higher. "We're being hailed," Rudy announced. Before Jax could say anything, the beep from the speakers overhead announced that Rudy had accepted the comm request. "Hello? Is this the ship that just departed? I'm Governor Trellum, the legally elected governor of Mariposa. I'm asking for asylum aboard your ship." When Jax didn't reply, the frantic man continued. "I'm in the command bunker, and my men tell me they can get me to the roof of the palace if you return. Hello?" Jax looked over his shoulder at Rudy, then said to the ceiling, "Sorry, Governor. We're pretty full and already burning for orbit. I'm sure you're not a completely horrible person, and that the election wasn't at all rigged by our Imperial friends, but, well, no." He slammed his hand on a control off to the side of his station, closing the channel. He looked at Rudy again. "Thanks. I needed to feel like a dick today." The droid made his shrugging motion. Jax glared, then said, "Skip, once we're free of the gravity well, go ahead and get us going toward the Relief Corps station." "Will do," the ship replied, Jax's flight console going dark as the SI took over. Jax motioned to Rudy. "Come on, You're gonna be Isaac for this little cruise." He didn't wait, heading down the stairs. "Who's Isaac?" Rudy asked as he rolled the stairs, sliding into the open center channel of the spiral stairwell. The Osprey's lounge appeared to have been taken over by Mr. Chen and his camp management team. Jax walked to the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of water, turning to Chen, then Naomi. "I thought you were all going to stay in the hold unless you had to use the head." He looked over to the door to the only restroom on the small ship. The door was closed. "Is this the bathroom line?" Chen shook his head. "It's not. We needed a place to work. It's pretty crowded down there." Jax looked at the assorted faces, then sighed and headed for his quarters. "We'll be at your corporate station in a few days. You'll have to work out a schedule for sleeping and such." He pointed towards a bulkhead. "Only the 2 guest berths. Both are double bunks." Rudy had parked near the large entertainment screen. Jax pointed at the droid. "If you need anything, talk to Rudy." Fish and spaceship guests. Jax managed to avoid his passengers for most of the trip. He'd never thought much about the single bathroom on the Osprey until he had to fight 12.5 strangers for the shower every morning. Skip spent most of the trip complaining about his overtaxed resources, only to have Jax tell him that they would stock up when they dropped the passengers off and that he just had to make do. The Relief Corps station was smaller than Kelso Station by at least half. Where Kelso was many decks above and below a large toroidal space dock, the Relief Corps station was mushroom-shaped and maybe only 20 levels tall. Docking arms reached out like spokes from the large upper section. Jax pointed out the forward view screen. "Guess they wanted to be sure we knew what their mission is." He grinned as Rudy turned and followed his finger. "Very clever," the droid replied. The Relief Corps station was painted red, with a white cross painted across the top of the mushroom cap section above each docking arm. "We've been clear to dock at Arm 3, Rudy added. "Cool. Go tell our guests to get ready to get the hell off this ship," Jax said, grinning as he thought about the payment that was about to clear his bank account. "You're thinking about money, aren't you?" Skip asked. "What makes you ask that?" Jax said, his smile vanishing as a blush crept up his neck. "You were grinning like an idiot," the ship's SI replied. "You do that when you think of money, or watch porn, but I know you're not doing the latter." "You can shut up now," Jax said, as docking arm 3 got closer. The Osprey had 2 cargo access doors, one on each side of the cargo bay. Each large door had a small personal hatch set in it. Docking arm 3 was a modern multimodal design, able to adjust its height and width to accommodate most ships' airlock designs, including the Osprey. The outer edge of the docking arm lit up as the Osprey got to within 10 meters of it. The ship thumped once as it nestled against the docking arm, allowing it to magnetically latch onto the ship. An indicator on his console lit up green. "Good seal," Skip reported. Jax hopped out of his seat and headed for the stairs. "Open us up, Skip." "Roger, Roger," the ship's SI replied. "Folks," Jax shouted as he descended the stairs into the crowded and not very good-smelling cargo hold. "We're docked with your corporate station." The personnel hatch set in the cargo hold door popped in, then slid aside. Just inside the docking arm was Mr. Klein, the man who hired Jax. "Welcome home, folks," the well-dressed businessman said. He stepped out of the way as the tired and foul-smelling aid workers started to file out of the Osprey. He walked over to Thomas Chen. The two shook hands and chatted a moment before the camp manager followed his group off the ship. From the threshold, Chen said, "Thank you again, Mr. Caruso." He waved once and vanished into the docking arm. Klein walked over to Jax. "Thank you, Mr. Caruso. We couldn't be more pleased to have our people back." Jax nodded and rested a hand on Rudy's head when the droid rolled over to the pair of humans. Klein continued, "I've authorized the rest of your payment. It should be in your account now." Jax looked down at Rudy, who tilted up and blinked a green light on his faceplate. "It was our pleasure, Mr. Klein." He looked around the hold. Loose bits of discarded clothes and various abandoned personal effects lay scattered around. Any chance we can stock up here at your station? I'd like to top off our consumables and maybe hire a cleaning droid to come through here with a flamethrower. The other man wrinkled his nose and nodded. Yes, that would make sense. He motioned for Jax to follow him off the ship. I'll help you make the arrangements. Jax looked over his shoulder. Rudy, you got this? The droid made a mechanical grumbling noise. Sure. You're the best, Jax shouted from further down the docking arm. He turned to Klein. So, Naomi Hamura, what's her deal? The other man looked at Jax. I don't know who that is.